Nice. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to wherever you are at the moment. Good evening, Paris. I'm
Good evening.
Isaac, part of the Earthbeat crew, and we're hosting tonight here in New Zealand. It's part of the human potential, moving uncertainty into action, something we started a few months ago as a result of festival cancellation due to COVID-19, something that shocked everyone around the world, of course, and put us in a state of unknown and uncertainty. Many things kind of came up as a result. And for us as an organization, something that was really alive is actually creating a space for transformation and new ways of living and talk and discussion, while we also remember the part of inclusion, which is really important as well when we do stuff. So we offer that space. So far we had awesome people from local and global community sharing their way of perceiving this uncertainty, and it was highly valuable, obviously. And tonight I'm pretty happy to have Dr. Paris Williams, and I'm glad that we had a quick chat as well yesterday, got to know a bit more, and I'll be very happy to have you supporting what we do, and hopefully we can have a time of expansion tonight with some knowledge and some awareness for different things. So you're here in New Zealand for 7 years, originally from the US. And I know you started with hang gliding, which is wonderful. And I really want to have a quick quote before you transitioned into psychology and studies, and obviously moving to New Zealand. I'm going to read a tiny bit from your website, and then because I really resonate with that as well, and I'd love to have you then share with us how we're going to unfold this talk tonight. As a hang gliding instructor, my primary role was to encourage people to overcome their fear and take a leap of faith from the secure ground into the unknown. Now, as a psychologist, I find that my primary role is still encouraging people to take a leap of faith into the unknown. But the difference is that in psychotherapy, the ground is the security of old habits, patterns, and overcoming our fear is the courage to takes to leap into the possibility of the whole new way of being in the world, with all the unknowns, obviously, that is there, and even risks that this entails. It seems that in order to live more fully and explore the bounds of our freedom, we have to let go of many of our secure but limiting habits and belief systems. So I feel that kind of gives some sort of awareness of what's going on. We all feel it at the moment, more than ever in our lifetime. And yeah, happy to see how we can touch on that as well, obviously. Hi, Paris.
Hi, Isaac. Yeah, thank you for having me, for hosting me, and thank you for this wonderful work that you guys are doing.
Yeah. So how are we going to kind of how are you going to start structure? You wanted to share with us some presentation and go around that. Do you want to touch on these things as well?
Yeah. So yeah, really resonating with what you guys are doing with your Earthbeat Festival. I was disappointed that it didn't happen, but really glad that you were able to carry it over into this format. In some ways, it even enriched it because you're able to get some speakers that you weren't able to have attend the actual festival. So that's been great to see. So I'm in an interesting sort of transition in my life at the moment. I guess if I back right up, I see my own path as fitting very much with the archetype of the wounded healer. So I've had a pretty painful childhood for the most part, a broken family, some trauma, time in a foster home, stuff like that. But I was fortunate that I had lived in a beautiful part of Northern California and the Sierra Nevadas, and was really connected to nature. That really helped me kind of worked through that, a lot of the difficult stuff, and became a strong resource of mine. And I watched the birds and dreamed from a very young age of flying. And so flying ended up hang gliding, became a huge resource and a way for me just to leave that crap on the ground and just get in the sky. And it was in many ways very healing, but in other ways it didn't really let me sort of work through the trauma of my youth. And in my late 20s, it all kind of came to a head. All that sort of trauma that I kind of buried came to the foreground, and I went through a really powerful experience, what I would call a spiritual emergency. If you were more Western inclined, you would say it had some psychotic features and some of the experiences that I was having at that time. But ultimately, it led me away from hang gliding as a career and to becoming a psychologist. And, as I became more and more, I had more and more understanding of the potential for deep transformation and healing within myself. It was just happening spontaneously. I hadn't asked for it. And yet some deep part of me had basically initiated this deep healing process. I became aware that, wow, there's so many other people going through their own deep spiritual, personal, psychological healing. And they often get labeled as mentally ill and not really validated for their experience, put on a lot of drugs, this kind of thing. And so I wanted to provide a more humanistic approach for supporting people through their own healing journeys. And at the same time, I became more and more aware of what was happening with the Earth. As a hang gliding instructor and competition pilot flying around the planet, I was seeing the destruction below me every day. Wilderness getting wiped out and pollution. So the two really came together for me. My love for nature, my concern for humankind and human beings, wanting to support them and wanting to support the Earth. And it all really kind of came together, and I became a psychologist, and ultimately now I'm moving more and more towards ecological approaches, ecotherapy, and wanting to ultimately set up a kind of eco-village and really support the mutual healing and connection between humans and Earth. It's all very deeply interrelated. Our own malady, our own illnesses in many ways, physiological, psychological, spiritual, I think, stem from our own disintegration from our source, right? Earth, Mother Earth, Gaia, the universe, each other, our fellow Earthlings. So looking at a big picture, I'd say, sometime about 10,000 years ago, we kind of stepped out of the Garden of Eden, just to use a metaphor. We've left our connection as one species of many, within our ecosystems, within the biosphere. And we developed this delusional belief system that somehow we're superior, we're different, we're better, human versus nature. And as we did that, on one hand, we began to really thrive because we could really take resources from the earth and from each other. Obviously, a lot of oppression happened towards other humans, towards animals, etc. But on the other hand, we disconnected from our own source of our own aliveness. And so I kind of see that right now we're thriving our way to our own demise. We're heading off a cliff of our own termination. We just can't keep this up. We're entering the sixth mass species extinction event in the last billion years. This one caused by us primarily, and I think we're going to be one of those species if we don't change our ways. And so what I really feel myself compelled to do is try to support this deeper healing that we need to do to actually be able to re-engage, reintegrate as one species, one synergistic, one harmonious species of many on this beautiful planet, to return to that niche that we had held previously as indigenous peoples. We had held that niche for hundreds of thousands of years, and now I think we really need to return to that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm kind of wondering, at this point, there's a few different directions I could take that. Do you have I don't know, just from maybe hearing what I just shared there, what do you feel like would be a helpful direction to take this thing forward?
I feel like would be nice, to something that you feel that we can actually have some tools or some ideas of how to actually, you know, we might know all of the things of the situation, but what we actually can do, or what is it that we can be devoted,
Yeah,
regardless of what's going on, because really unknown is something that we're born into anyway. It's nothing new.
that's
Um,
right.
there
Yeah,
is there is always something to remind us of it. You know, maybe every decade, maybe every lifetime. When my dad passed away, it reminded me that actually there is that sort of end to things in that sort of physical realm, in that sort of. So we have lots of reminders of that uncertainty, and I feel like is how we actually can create a way in which we able to challenge that as well and continue being devoted to what we love until 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 the end. Death is okay ultimately, you know.
absolutely. And I think it's helpful to look at the issue of global crisis, kind of that we're talking about,
Mm,
uh, and kind of separate it, even though they're intricately interdependent, but separate it to look at it from a personal level and a collective level. You know, what can little me do, kind of A, both to maybe contribute in some way, and B, to try to make the
yeah,
best of my own life in this situation. And also, what can we do collectively, right, as a species and human society and all of that.
exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of, how do we bridge the gap, and what does that look like? I love the expression, or the question, I should say, where does my personal passion meet the world's needs? I don't know who coined this particular question, but I think it's a wonderful way to bridge that gap. Because I think is ultimately, when you look at the idea of Gaia, so Gaia is the idea, and it's actually a very well scientifically established idea that the entire Earth can be seen as an organism in her own right, a living being, a whole living being in her own right. She's self-organizing, self-maintaining,
Absolutely.
and all of us, all living beings on her, are simply part of her in the same way that all of the cells in my body are part of this organism called Paris. And ultimately, each cell is is an autonomous agent. You know, they each have their own role, and they try to maintain their own individual existence, and et cetera. But they all have to work synergistically with all the other cells in my body for this being to thrive. And I think it's exactly the same with all the living beings on Gaia, on the biosphere. And so when here I am, I'm alive, I'm conscious, I exist, I'm a member of this Gaian system. What do I do? I think first of all, if we actually connect to our essential self, so this is where I think all spiritual practices have something like mindfulness. Basically, practice of having an open, curious connection to what's going on in my experience, my thoughts, my impulses, my sensations, my feelings. Can I just be with that in an open, curious, and accepting way? And when I do that, I'm connecting to my essential self. And when I connect to my essential self, I believe I'm actually connecting to that aspect of myself, which is deeply synergistic with Gaia. And what naturally happens once you kind of move through the various layers of greed and fear and the disconnected feelings we all struggle with sometimes, and experience that deeper connection to essential self. Ironically, that becomes a portal through which to connect more deeply with Gaia. And from this place, we can actually trust our own impulse. We can trust that we all have a unique gift that no other being on this planet actually has. Just like we have myself, you, all of us. There's something unique that only I have, only you have, only the other person has. Nobody can tell any of us what that gift is. The only way we can discover it is by actually connecting to ourselves in this way. But as we do that, I'm a strong believer that we'll naturally connect to what's important, like my role here to actually be able to contribute to the functioning of the whole organism, Gaia, the ecosystems of biosphere, which are part. And so that, ironically, by going deep inside, it's a portal to actually what's needed,
Absolutely.
to open up. And there's two possibilities. One is, okay, maybe it's too far. A lot of people believe that, the human species has gone too far. There's a cliff. We can't turn back. We're probably going to go extinct. And the reality is, in my opinion, it's very complicated. It's a compelling argument, and it may be true, but I think nobody knows really. But if I actually live in this particular way, if I live right? By really deepening my connection to my essential self, and from there, using that as a conduit to deepen my connection with other humans, earthlings, and earth, I will live the most fulfilling, enjoyable, meaningful life I could possibly live. And ultimately, we're all going to die anyway, right? Even if you know,
Exactly.
we get through this, we're all going to die anyway, but that's a guarantee. And so, in a way, it doesn't even change anything, really. Like the global crisis doesn't really change, I think, how we have to live, you know, to make the most of our life. We have to live in this heartful, connected way to make the most of our life anyway, and ultimately to die with dignity, with grace, and with gratitude for the life that I've lived, right? Ultimately, that's the best we can all attain, is to be on my deathbed and feel a sense of real, you know, delight and gratitude for the life that I've lived, and you know, appreciation I've done the best I could, and tried to live, you know, with integrity with my values, and really appreciated the deep connections I made in my life. And, you know, that's enough, I think. And then I think if enough of us actually do that, we might actually pull through this thing. We may not, but, you know, that's our best chance, ultimately, I would say.
Yeah, of having that state. You know, there was a research conducted in one of the US universities, and it started about the late 30s, and it followed about 750 different men, and over 4 generations already. So the children of children of children of these people from 1936. And that research was to do with what makes people happy in life. What is it truly that sense of happiness and fulfillment, as you said? And it's astonishing because it's the only research currently conducted in such way, and over that long period of time as well. And the findings are pretty awesome because it's 100% of people were, I think, or close to that, said that relationships with other people, with themselves, were the most profound and important stuff that really impacted their life. Some of them were rich out of these 750 people, some less, some unprivileged. One of them was president of the United States. So there is range of people in this research for that discovery of truly what is that devotion or sense of happiness and fulfillment we have. And as you said, it's these relationships with nature, with planet. But it's how can we remind ourselves these things, you know what I mean? And keep living that.
Yeah, especially in a society that promotes this idea that material possession is somehow the answer to happiness, right? And material and, you know, achievements and possessions, and so we're actually brought up in a society that generally conditions us to. I'm going to back up a minute. So I often use the distinction between synergy and disintegration, both in personal healing and earth healing. And I see so much of the maladies, and I think you can look at this at all levels of wellness, whether you're talking physiological, psychological, spiritual, social, disintegration, disconnection, disintegrating from the whole in some way. And again, it depends on the context, leads to illness, to malady, to pain, suffering. And reintegration, or if you want to take it even further, synergy, which is essentially the idea that collaboration and connection creates something more than the sum of its parts. Right? You actually end up with an experience and quality that's even more than what you can get from the individual parts. That when we actually have that synergistic connection, again, with self or others or you know, the earth, then that's synonymous really with wellness. And again, on almost any level. Unfortunately, though, our society has evolved to, I think, a very confused place where we've, generally speaking, as indigenous peoples, I think, you know, we had it, we really got it. The connection with earth and each other was what, you know, where happiness and fulfillment really lie. But somehow it's like we lost that. It was a great forgetting, some people call it. Became more and more consumed, you know, with personal acquisitions and moving away from connections with others and moving more and more towards personal achievements and all of that as a source of happiness. What we found, and like you said, the research you pointed to there and other research said, we actually found once our basic needs are actually met, so if you actually look at, you know, once basic, shelter and food and water and things like that are basically met, any wealth beyond that, like actually gaining more and more material wealth on that, doesn't actually correspond with increasing happiness. In fact, it actually corresponds with increasing sense of scarcity, ironically, kind of like an addiction. The more, if you think of addiction, at a certain point, the more you have, the more you need. You end up with a bottomless bucket that you just can't fill. And so we end up raised in this society and conditioned in a society to think that we can fill this bottomless bucket by just simply getting more achievements, more possessions, etc. But all it does is make, the bucket bigger, so to speak.
Mm.
And so we end up further going down the path of disintegration. And because we're conditioned in that society, we think that's normal. So we think this sick, broken system, dysfunctional system is normal because that's what we've been conditioned to believe.
Absolutely.
And the sad thing is that what you're saying is actually really what should be normal, in the sense of actually it's connection with each other, self, experiencing love, compassion, collaboration. These are the things that really correspond to the deeper sense of fulfillment, that I think most of us really long for.
I like what you said, that two things that really kind of stood out for me. One of them is we forgot, as you said. And it's actually a good sign. That means we have it and we forgot about it. So we actually can have reminders of how to bring it back and peels all these layers that we describe, which are external layers of the environment, of material, of notion, of beliefs, and all sorts of stuff like that. So I love it. So we forgot about it. We need just to remind ourselves. And that reminder can be various ways. And this is something that we can touch on it, obviously. And the other thing that I really resonate is the basic needs met. We have to allow the basic needs to be there for people to be able to have that capacity to remember what we forgot.
That's right.
And then free ourselves from that sort of suffering. In many religions, they talk about it, from Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity. Many touch on these things in different ways. And I feel it's like how we can actually tangible ideas to the basic needs met, and tangible ideas of the reminder of what we forgot.
That's right.
And the link between them. So there is the foundation, and the next chapter is to remind. And as a result of it, so how we can kind of have this, in your opinion, what are the foundations, the fundamental key points that the basic needs would be okay? What can we imagine? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's what can we imagine, basically, for this to unfold.
That's right. And there's a few, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. One way to look at the issue is the idea of limiting core belief. We've developed certain limiting core beliefs, that keep the system entrenched. And one of this, and I believe the limiting core belief of scarcity, right? There's not enough. There's not enough. We have to, the world, is competitive. I have to fight to get my needs met. And with that belief, I think it stems ironically from disconnection. So we have this, we've disconnected from Earth, from Earthlings, from, our fellow humans, and from our central self, which naturally leads to a sense of scarcity inside. Like it's a palpable experience of scarcity. And the problem is we mistake the cause of that scarcity, often, and turn towards, again, trying to accumulate material possessions rather than turn towards connection. So what happens is we turn towards accumulating, more and more things to try to feel that bottomless bucket. And so what ends up happening is hoarding, greed. And again, we all have this capacity, this potential. It's not evil. It's just, if I feel like I don't have enough, I'm gonna hoard, right? It's just what I'm gonna naturally do. And ironically, it becomes a real problem, especially when you have some people with millions, billions of dollars, and other people can't even feed their kids. You end up with a situation where, like Gandhi said, there's enough for everybody's need, but there's not enough for everybody's greed. And it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. of scarcity, which causing people to hoard, which actually creates a real scarcity, an actual scarcity develops. Whereas if we can look at that limiting core belief and go, maybe there actually is enough really for everybody's basic needs to get met. What if that's actually true? Which from all the figures I've seen, it actually is true. So if we could shift to that idea that actually there isn't enough for everybody's needs. Greed? No. Needs, yes. And we can trust in that and trust in the basic goodness and the basic sense of abundance here on this earth. This earth has been providing for billions of years, all the creatures on this earth, and it still can do so. And then we can start to come out of the idea and the experience of scarcity and start to actually trust it. As I kind of open up and pay it forward and trust, I don't really need that third house and that extra $1 million, whatever it is. But, these people could use that. They really, they can't even feed their kids. Then we start to move towards a world of abundance and away from scarcity. And as we move more and more towards that world, then a social fabric becomes much more harmonious. Think about crime rates go way down when everybody's basic needs are met. Wealthier people, more privileged people will naturally feel safer, and it becomes a perpetuating instead of a vicious cycle, a victorious cycle, moving more and more towards a world of abundance. But in order to do that, we have to actually do the deep work of cultivating connection, because the problem, I think, stems at a very deep level. And this is where I think a lot of spiritual traditions really touch on what can I actually do? I've been raised in a culture that has conditioned me that disconnection is normal. So I actually have to actively strive against the conditioning. I can't just think my way out, but I actually have to literally act my way, use my behavior change out of this problem by doing things like, first of all, connect to my essential self, like actually practicing things like mindfulness, yoga, anything that actually involves me connecting to my here and now experience and making peace with that. Actually taking the time to, slow down from the rat race and actually connect, have a real dialogue with other human beings, just take a few minutes out of my day here and there and really just stop and give my full attention to another person and really try to connect and put myself in their shoes. And do the same thing to fellow earthlings, whether it's animals or spending time in nature. Like, actually, we have to cultivate that. And ironically, I think one of the most powerful ways we do that is through our consumerism. So consumerism, in many ways, is a symptom of our disease, needing to consume more and more. And the reality is we've developed a system where we can't all just grow our own food and make our own clothes. We do have to buy stuff, most of us anyway. We do have to consume and be involved in making purchases. We can turn the idea of actually making purchases around to cultivate my own compassion and love and synergistic feelings by every time I spend $1, $5 or whatever, $10, I actually think for a moment, okay, this is a vote. Like, I'm giving this money to some person or industry or organization, and I'm basically saying, you keep doing what you're doing, because here you go, here's more money. And if I have to actually stop for a moment and just contemplate, like, what's on the other side of this dollar? And is that something that I actually really want to support and is in line with my values? And it could be something really simple. Like moving towards, for example, moving more towards sustainable food, more plant-based, local, thinking about the idea of slave labor and the fair trade and these kinds of issues in the products that I buy. It might seem simple. What's little me is $20 going to really make a difference?
Massive.
But it adds up on one hand in a literal sense, and on a personal sense, I'm actually actively cultivating those synergistic feelings by having to think every time. And at first, people, a lot of people think, well, it's really inconvenient. But if you think the inconvenience is nothing compared to the benefit of actually taking a moment and actually feeling my heart connect to what's on the other side of that purchase. So as far as a literal thing I can do every day, that's huge. Thinking really heartfully about these purchases that I'm making. And furthermore, we can do that with all of our, actions. Every word I speak, every action I take, just take a moment and go, what's the likely result of this? And is this actually in service of connection, kindness, or the values that I think are really, where does my passion meet the world's needs? Is it in service of that question, or is it not? And I think that will take us in the direction for personal well-being and collective well-being, really. I know it sounds really simple, and the reality is it's more complicated than that, but I think that's one of the really deep practical things we can all do right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I wish we could also have support of creating new concept in a way of some level of finance to help the basic needs to be met for people, because at least for me, I feel that is the root of how we actually operate in the world these days, and the validation we give to that imaginary concept,
Yes.
in the all aspects of it. It is an imaginary concept which constructed in our mind, and it's beautifully valued because we all, as you said, if we all give $10 to fuel today, companies are still going to be doing that, or someone else. So we actually, that is, so how can we now, like, for example, if we can create a foundation of, I don't know, universal basic income for people, and then we can actually help removing the constant struggle and stress that many people suffer from, based on financially and the judgment why this one doesn't work or why this one, all sorts of stuff, like the chain of events in our society around that. And I feel that can actually help in mitigating that gap in between taking that next leap of awareness, of actually moving on from the struggle that we actually imposed on ourselves by creating that system, which is funny because I believe we created it to help us out, right? Not
Sure.
to be really slave to it.
Right.
And it actually created otherwise, in a way,
Yeah.
the dynamic, you
Yeah.
know? So I feel like if that can actually be part of what we want to convey to our representatives in
Yes.
parliament, in all sorts of stuff, that for me would be really the basic needs roots to be start from that. Something is going to grow as a result. And I feel like we're currently in New Zealand, you and I, and I feel New Zealand is a great space for it. Um, Unlike many other places that have so many layers of existence, to be able to think about completely changing conditioning belief that this is the only way, as if nature came up with that. Do you know what I mean? And I feel we have the path of spirituality, and then that sort of the essence of how we work here in a way.
That's
What's your
right.
thoughts about something like that?
Wow. I mean, you said a lot of things that I really resonate with. Well, I mean, look at the idea of spirituality, right? All cultures that we know of have some form of spirituality. And how do you define spirituality in the broadest sense? I would say is actually connecting to something larger than the limited self, right? Transcending the limited egoic self in some way, right? And essentially appreciating that, more than just this self here. I'm part of a tribe or iwi, part of human society. I'm part of this ecosystem, this biosphere, universe, the divine, whatever you want to call it. And I think, that impulse towards spirituality is all about that. It's about, on some level, deep level, we recognize that's so important to not lose those deep connections. And of course, it manifests in different cultures in different ways, but I think they all share the basic essence. And so there's often this kind of rift, right? This rupture between spirituality and science, so-called modern science. And I think that ultimately the solutions, if you look on a more collective level, are going to require bringing the two together. They're actually both holding something really important. Spirituality is, holds heart, holds ultimately the fabric of our essence, of our aliveness, of our connections. And if we lose that, then we're going to lose everything. I think our species will terminate, On the other hand, our sciences do give us the capacity, they increase our capacity, essentially, we might say they increase power. So I like the definition of power is the capacity to harness resources to meet needs. Ultimately, that's kind of the idea of power. So power by itself is neutral, right? It Power can be used for creativity and support and meeting needs, or it can be used, very selfishly and, meeting my needs at the expense of others or whatnot. So power by itself is neutral. It depends on how we use it. And science and technology, what do? They give us more power, essentially. And because we've generally become disconnected and fragmented from the earth, our science and technology has generally gone along with that and actually created more destruction than, I would say, if you look at the big picture, created far more destruction and harm than ultimate benefit. If you look at the long picture. In the short picture, it might be hard to see that, but if you look another 100 years down the road, I think it'd be really obvious we've done far more harm than good with our power and our science and our technology. But it doesn't. I think our solution isn't going to be throwing that away. I think ultimately it's about integrating the two. That ultimately, the technology, the power, but it has to be wedded to our wisdom and our love and our compassion. And as long as we sort of hold the principle that our love and our compassion, our synergistic feelings, essentially, our connection has to exceed our power, then we can survive. But if the other way around, if our power exceeds our love and compassion, then we won't. We'll disintegrate and we'll terminate. And so ultimately, I think that's the emergence. So there's a principle of emergence that I think is really beautiful. And it actually, speaking of science, the word emergence comes from complexity theory. And even the principle is, you can find it in all spiritual traditions in different ways. But the idea is that if you look at evolution, there are a series of steps happens where a crisis unfolds and it looks like something awful, like a mass extinction event. Maybe the biosphere will completely collapse, and then there has been a sudden emergence to a higher order of complexity where the living organisms, manage to emerge to a new level of order of complexity, of power, technology, you might say, that transcended the crisis and continued on. And this has happened through the history of Gaia. We've seen these moments of enormous emergence, from single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms, et cetera. And I think we're at this threshold of humanity right now, where we can either self-destruct and disintegrate completely, or we can emerge. And my sense is the emergence is going to actually be a wedding of those two things. It's going to be a wedding of our power, our technology, our science, and our spirituality. And what it's going to involve is actually returning to hold a deep respect for indigenous peoples, because I think indigenous peoples actually we live for hundreds of thousands of years in harmony with our ecosystems as indigenous peoples. And so we obviously were doing something right? We lived harmoniously for hundreds of thousands of years. And then as soon as we left that way of living and kind of moved towards what we might think of as a more technological, more hierarchical, more disintegrated way of living about 10,000 years ago, we've set ourselves on a path of self-destruction within about 10,000 years. So I think where we're at now, it's like actually remembering, like first of all, acknowledging there's been a great forgetting, and now we need a great remembering. And who holds the memory? It's actually our indigenous. We all have indigenous ancestry, so we can trust. We all have indigenous roots. And fortunately, while they still remain, there's some indigenous people, some people, elders, who hold the indigenous traditions that they need to be brought to the table, and so we can remember what it was like to live as one species of many equal species on a harmonious, synergistic planet. And then from there, the emergence, I think, will happen. And we can't know what it looks like. By definition, emergence is evolving to a new level that's greater than the sum of its, with new qualities that never existed previously. So on one hand, we can never know what it will actually look like until it happens. But on the other hand, we know that it can happen because this has happened again and again in evolution. So I think we have a possibility of pulling through, but it's going to require a lot of humility on the part of the privileged of us, those of us who are fairly privileged in society, to recognize, what, I'm doing really well. I've got my basic needs met. There's so many people who don't. Actually, Western science does not have all the answers, because look at what a mess we've made of this place. We're going to have to be much more generous and find a way that everybody's needs can be met. And B, we're going to have to actually bring back in the narratives and the myths and the stories and the wisdom of indigenous peoples in order to actually get through this thing.
Yeah, I guess is maybe when we say Western science, I feel it's not necessarily science itself, because ultimately you can have many things in the realm of knowledge, but how you use that knowledge, that's what's important. So it's less the Western science, is more the people that possessed that knowledge of science, this case, or knowledge of whatever that might be, technology and knowledge of life. And I feel the wisdom of ancient and the wisdom of indigenous that are still actively acting as indigenous guardians of this planet. And I love what you said about merging science and spirituality would mean that we harmoniously having both of them, living in harmony with Gaia while we actually enjoying the power that we receive out of advanced technology, and things like that. So I guess it's like, how can we develop that path that for them to merge together, knowing that we have both of them, each one of us, in terms of spirit, soul, feelings, all these sort of illusions of the mind into this physical body that eventually I'm going to become maybe a plant, which, you know what I mean? I'll be keen to be a plant by the end of it. So it's kind of that sort of simplicity in a way as well. Be, as you said, the humility is that actually simplicity. I feel like we are so complex in one hand, but the duality of it is when we are yet very simple in what we actually need. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
What we need is a very simple things, really, that acknowledge, that love, that touch, that contact, sort of, you know, acknowledgement. And so these little simple things actually fills us more than most of the complex ideas and that we have in a way. So I really resonate with how you sort of support the merge science and spirituality while we're acknowledging them both. Did you want to share something with this presentation, or you feel kind of okay to sort of carry on?
Yeah, I'm kind of, actually, I already have been. So.
Wonderful. I thought it's something
there's
that
a lot
you
of what
wanted
you've been
to show
talking
or
about.
whatever. Wonderful.
Very much part of the workshop I've been teaching.
Yeah.
From what you've been saying, there are a few things came up. One is the idea, you're right, science, what does that actually mean? You know, like, generally speaking, you could say humans are not the only creatures, first of all, who do science, and all cultures have it. And essentially, it's about attempting to actually make sense of the world around us, right, in some way, to be able to gain some kind of understanding, knowledge, wisdom of the nature of things, so that ultimately I can harness that knowledge, that wisdom, to be able to meet needs. I think science, in the most general term, is basically means that. And I think where Western, so I don't really like the word Western, but I'll just contemporary science, I'll say, has kind of steered wrong, is it's become very objective. It's this, somehow we developed, somewhere along the way we developed this assumption, which is actually false. In fact, science, so contemporary science, it's actually, what I'm talking about is called positivistic science. Positivism or positivistic science has these certain assumptions about the world that are actually wrong, and they're really problematic. One is that it's possible to have this subject-object relationship with whatever you're studying, that I can be a subject and I can study that object over there that I'm not connected to. Ironically, you know, leading edge of physics and quantum mechanics has actually demonstrated that that's actually not even possible. Like, you can't actually remove, you know, the observer from the observed. You know, we're so intricately interconnected that it's actually not even possible to do in the first place. So I think that's one of the places we steer, and that's part of that same malady of disconnection, this delusion that there can be a separate me from the earth, from you. You know, ultimately we're all fundamentally interdependent, interconnected. And so, and this is where I think indigenous people really need to be valued for the sciences that they have actually developed. Because what you find when you look at indigenous cultures, at least what I found, is a much more subjective science. You see a way of gathering information, like whether it's plant medicine, for example, or just really understanding the nature of the fellow earthlings and how they live and how we can have circular economy with them, how they can gain resources from other living forms, but also give back in a way that's circular and regenerative. And all of that can be seen as science, but it's subjective science. We're acknowledging that all of our fellow living beings and systems have their own subjectivity, and we have to actually function intersubjectively. And so that's where I think contemporary science has gone so far off base, this whole idea of objectivity. So if we can bring that back to a subjective science, like, okay, what is actually going on in the shoes of that living being, that living system? If I put myself in there, what is it what are their needs? And what are my needs? How can we bring all that together and develop a strategy where everybody's needs can actually be met? Mm-hmm. I think the spirituality, in a way, it holds the heart, and again, the science holds the technology, and the two coming together. What we find is subjective science, which very much embodies the principles of nonviolence, the nonviolence movement, humanistic psychology, nonviolent communication. There's these ideas that all living systems and living beings have basic needs in order to survive and thrive. But there's different strategies to meet them. And so when you have multiple living beings coming together, whether it's multiple people or tribes or whatever, ecosystem, in order to live harmoniously, you have to get everybody's needs on the table, first of all, before you even think about strategy. It's just, okay, what are the needs that are most pressing, most relevant here right now? Great, so this person or group needs these things. Right now they need fresh water or food, or this people need safety or whatever it is. So you get the needs on the table. Now let's work collaboratively to develop a strategy to where all those needs can be met. And we trust that by doing that it's possible. As opposed to this idea that my needs are in opposition to your needs, and we have to fight for resources to try to see whose needs get met, right? Which is kind of the world we live in now, sadly. And if we shift to this idea that actually there's enough, and okay, instead of fighting over this is your land, this is my land, whoever's, we can go, okay, what is it okay, so you need fresh water and space to grow food, and whatever, you might need fresh water and space to grow food as well, and So actually, instead of fighting over who owns this particular piece of land, let's come together and strategize. How can everybody get fresh water and food? Mm-hmm. So that's an example of actually moving to a more subjective science, working synergistically. You're acknowledging everyone's needs, and you're trusting that if you do that, we can find the solutions. And you step out of scarcity and you move into abundance and generosity. Does that make sense?
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Moving to abundance and generosity is it's something that is part of what we call forgetting. I feel generosity is something that when we actually act this way, it's the most fulfilling thing we experience in terms of human gestures and human experience with one another. And I believe many of us, when we actually do something for others or whatever that might be looking like, the sense of fulfillment and appreciation is possibly the biggest we ever feel in that regards. And I feel like you also, it's that sort of relationship with the planet as well, and asking the planet whether the planet needs have been met, whether Gaia is happy, whether Gaia is thriving as well. So it's us thriving with that. Hi, Sadra. Sadra joined us.
Hey, I'm just tuning in. Hey, Paris.
Nice.
I'm really enjoying the conversation. So I had a few
welcome, brother.
Yeah, I had a few questions, so I thought I'd jump in and ask them. And one of them is that just the idea of how do we ground this approach, which is in essence what what I've been hearing you talk about is a living systems mind, like a mind that sees the world as the world that we live in as living and dynamic and constantly evolving. And yeah, just curious if there are any frameworks or methodologies or training even that you've come across that help to shift us from that, what we're conditioned, like that linear kind of problem solving, solutions orientated mindset that we have, to a way of working that's more aligned with the living systems that we're a part of.
Yeah, no, wonderful question. So twofold answer. One, I think we have to do the personal work, like I was talking about earlier. The daily practices that deepen my own synergistic feelings, that deepen my sense of connection to self. So like different kinds of meditations can help in this way, or just generally feeling at home in my body in different ways. And just the awareness of, my consuming habits, these kinds of things. I'm basically conditioning my experience to just generally be more connecting, compassionate, kind, etc., to other living beings and living systems. And then on a bigger level, like we're talking about, how do we work towards a world in which everyone's needs can be met? There is a system. It actually stemmed from Carl Rogers' work in humanistic psychology, which I think is my personal favorite sort of form of contemporary psychology, because it really tries to be inclusive. Like, it really draws from spiritual traditions, indigenous traditions, etc., as well as the more contemporary psychologies. And the idea, they really highlight the idea of needs. And so from the humanistic psychology became a model called nonviolent communication, NVC for short. And I think they have this really simple, elegant approach that you can, you go and do a couple of weekends and you can really get it, of basically understanding your experience, other experiences, people's behaviors as always being embedded in needs. So the idea is that everything that we do, every strategy I do, everything that somebody does, even if it seems evil, from my perspective, they're just trying to meet their needs the best that they can. It's a strategy to try to meet a need. So if we kind of dig below the individual strategies and just connect to what are the actual universal needs, what are the core needs that are alive here, and then we meet at that place, that's where we can find solutions. And from that same model, you can actually, and I do a lot of this in my own practice as a psychologist, you can learn how to do mediation. It's a really lovely, effective way of doing mediation, where you bring people together and you give them basic groundwork, and you say, okay, we're going to first just help people kind of zero down. And so what are the core needs for you? What are the core needs for you? Put them on the table. And then, okay, now that we've done that, now let's brainstorm and find solutions. And you can do this in any context, whether you're talking about a couple that's fighting, or a family that's kind of, having a hard time, whether it's, two tribes or even nations that are fighting, right? You can actually bring them together and do the same work. And whether it's working with the earth, bring this particular ecosystem or these particular species onto the table, have their need. Okay, they have these needs, we have these needs. So it's actually a beautiful, elegant system of mediation, essentially, and working collaboratively.
And that was Carl, Karl.
Yeah, Carl Rogers, Carl Rogers, was the humanistic psychologist who then had a protege, Marshall Rosenberg, who developed nonviolent communication, or NVC for short. And it's just, I love it because you don't have to go years and years to school. You can actually spend a few weekends. It's so simple and it's so intuitive. My wife and I have been teaching this for quite a long time. I use it almost everything I do in my work. And it's so intuitive. I haven't had a single person disagree with the premise of it. Usually wow, that's great. I totally get that.
Yeah, you must be familiar with Susie's work then.
Susie, what's the last name?
I've totally forgotten her last name.
Is she a New Zealand-based
Yeah, NVC
Susie
practitioner.
Spiller.
Susie Spiller, that's her.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I am. I know Susie. I don't know her that well, but I've actually hung out with her a couple of times. And yeah, that's right. She's an MVC teacher.
Yeah, we did it. We as a crew we did a 1 day workshop with her up at Archie Creek
Oh, okay.
last year, which was great. It was really good. It's just a good reminder to continue that conversation with her and yeah, weave it into our work a bit more. Yeah.
And I think one of the things I appreciate is it's so simple and kind of universal. It just goes to the really basic universal human needs. Meaning, obviously physiological needs, and then meaning and love and autonomy and freedom. It's so simple that it can kind of cross all cultural bounds. Like, I think any ethnicity or group, they come together, and there's a real kind of common fabric there from which we can meet and dialogue from that place. And the principle of equality, that everybody's needs matter. Nobody's needs matter more or less than anybody else. And then you include other living beings, not just humans. And yeah, it's just that's the kind of solution. I'm sure it's not the only one, but it's the kind of solutions that I think we need. It's simple, intuitive, and universal. That it can apply to so many contexts.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of one of the teachers in the regenerative development work that I'm involved in, and he talks about it as the 5 whys. But his name's Bill Reed, and he gives this example of he works with some infrastructure projects and gets community engagement for infrastructure projects, and there's always people that step into the room and are butting heads around should we add a lane onto the highway, or should we create a train route, and in the end he takes them through this. They're disagreeing in the room, but he takes them through this process of, well, why do you want that? And then just drilling down to like, what's the actual need behind why you want it? And then it brings people to a place where, oh, right, you both want to go, you both want to get home sooner so you can spend time with your family. And in the end, that need tends to be something that unites people together. Whereas if we're there in the room talking about the strategy, as you say, it's often, we're often conflicting and butting heads.
That's right, and that's where most of the conflict comes from. My opinion, a lot of our opinion is the strategy. We're attached to the strategy, and if we can let go of the particular strategy, at least for a moment, set it aside, and really come down to those needs, then we're so much more likely to
actually
works for everyone.
It's the basic needs and the simplicity of it. Really, it's the strategy, and everything else is these all forecasts and stuff and imaginary things and planning and all sorts of stuff. But the simple things like coming back home faster to see your family, or having food. Another example, if an Israeli and Palestinian are going to sit over hummus and falafel, maybe they're going to find a lot more in common than actually they don't.
So right.
these simple
they're
things,
human beings. That's
exactly. Right. You want to be back sooner to be with your family. We share a meal together. So those simple basic needs, they are actually the foundations. And this is what we actually, in a way, forgetting. That's why everyone tries to shine when they come up with a project of council. So the architect or whatever the designer wants to shine. So they're going to say why they want this and that and that. So there is a lot of ego and things like that. So how can we be humble about it?
And even in that situation, you would say, okay, why is this person wanting to shine? Is it something about self-worth, that they want to be valued, they want to contribute? Yeah, so you could actually get curious about it and put that on the table as well. Okay, great. So right now for this person, it's really important to have a sense of being valued, for example.
Exactly.
Right, let's put that on the table too. So you can weave in anything, and remember, all behaviors are attempts at being needs.
Wonderful. Nice. If we got some time left, oh my God, it's over an hour already, almost, which is wonderful. Perry, something that inspires you these days?
You're asking me something that inspires me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so outside, obviously, I'm deeply inspired by just time and nature and all of that. But as far as in the human realm, I'm actually quite inspired. So there's something. In order to say this, because it's going to sound terrible, I'm inspired by what I'm seeing as sort of the unraveling of social fabric at the moment. I know there's so much suffering and harm as part of that, but part of why I'm inspired by that is I know that deep transformation on a human level has to first involve like a disintegration of the old way of being, the old belief systems, the old constructs, the old habits, in order to develop something new. And I was thinking, if we just continue along this trajectory, we're totally screwed, And so, like, hopefully very soon, we're going to start seeing the fabric start to unravel, because that's the only thing that's going to save us. Like, the old fabric has to unravel so a new, more synergistic fabric can be woven. And so right now, as I'm seeing, like, so many levels, this unraveling happen. And while totally acknowledging all the pain that can go along with that, I'm also feeling a sense of hope. Like, actually, this could be the first stirrings of actually the emergence, that we really need. So that's inspiring me on many levels, and the courage of people to really be authentic and speak truth to power, and to say, hey, that's actually not okay anymore, to treat Black people or Mexicans or women or whatever it might be like that. We're actually not going to tolerate that anymore. So that I'm feeling quite inspired by that. And I'm feeling inspired by seeing this movement towards considerate action, conscious living, like this movement towards people actually wanting to eat lower on the food chain, moving toward more plant-based living and regenerative farming, organic, things that are obviously about considering the effects of other beings, and how that's really starting to blossom in the world. So I'm feeling really inspired by that too. Just to name a couple.
It's I resonate with what you said in terms of the current state of things and the situation. I'm actually I would use that as well, if you don't mind. I'm inspired by that myself, because the opportunities that lie now are absolutely endless, and in a way we are coming to a space of actually wanting now to take that action, take that leap. As you said, it starts with maybe some pain and destruction and things like that, but it's part of it. It's part of it, and what we do. How can we continue following up on what we talk now, or what is it that you currently offer, or if people are interested to be in that sort of?
Yeah, so I put together a website as part of this charity that I'm part of, Center for Nonviolence and Conscious Living. That's kind of a mouthful, but
Wonderful.
The website is cncl.info, cncl.info. I'm regularly putting on articles that I think are very much in line with what we've been talking about, events. I've got a whole bunch of resource pages, a really extensive resource directory of organizations that I feel are living very much in line with these principles we've been talking about. There's a whole conscious living resolution, so people can, if they want, it just gives a whole list of ideas of things you can actually start incorporating in your day-to-day life, that are aligned with these basic principles. So there's quite a lot. So it's worth just having a perusal, look around the website. So that's probably the main, I guess, offering I want to provide, at least for this audience right now, and hope to be offering a lot more down the road, with establishing an eco-village and hopefully doing workshops and respite, stuff like that there. I'm also going to be hosting these navigating global crisis workshops probably every 6 to 8 weeks. So those will be advertised on that same website.
Wonderful. Is it a physical space or online? Or?
It's online. It's
okay, cool.
Doing it 3 hours online, interactive. So, I make space for some small group interaction, as well as some videos and things.
Wonderful. That's great. I really want to acknowledge your time with us tonight, and I really enjoyed hearing you and the conversation, and thanks for Sadra for jumping in and coming with some awesome question about how to be actually create a framework around these things. And I'll just kind of highlight the notion of the simplicity and the acknowledgement of what we actually need as humans. And I'd love to see you in our festival next year. Hopefully it's gonna run for 5 days. So maybe we can create and design some deep workshop, a journey for people to be part of.
I'd love to.
And I really wish to thank you, and I hope I'm going to see you soon. Cheers for that. Have a good night, and we see you soon. Awesome. And that's us for Earthbeat, the Human Potential. Hopefully we can see you soon in one of our physical or online events. All the best. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.